Hi everyone, it's QuickyBaby and welcome back to World of Tanks, and Wargaming are announcing today that they have plans to buff or at least take to the super test most of the American heavy tanks and the vehicles leading up towards them in the game. And this is so soon after they announced nerfs to the Kranvang and buffs to the AMX M444. It's an absolute pleasure for me that Wargaming are getting back to the very fundamentals of game management and buffing and nerfing vehicles inside the tech tree that are an absolute pain to be able to make your way up, or people just don't even really consider playing them inside the game. This is a big win for everyone out there who likes to play tech tree tanks, and also for anyone who haven't made their way up what should be a classic line in World of Tanks with some of the original vehicles in the game like the M6 and the T32. As with these buffs, maybe they're going to be a little bit playable. So I'm going to start from the top and work my way down, but some of you might be surprised that I'm not going to be talking about the T110E5 to begin with. And that's quite surprising to me because the T110E5 doesn't exactly have the best win ratio. In fact, it's got the third worst win ratio of any tech tree heavy tank, only just a little bit better with regards to it than the AMX M444 that Wargaming just announced they wanted to buff so much. So a little bit surprised here that they don't have plans for it. But honestly, when I play the T110E5, I don't even think it's that poor. And maybe when they buff the vehicles that are leading up towards it, that maybe some of the better players are going to start playing that tank again. And I really think that the problem with the T110E5 is not the T110E5 necessarily, it's vehicles like the Super Conqueror and the Kranvang that just keep holding it down on a ridgeline. Anyway, maybe Wargaming will address the T110E5 in a later patch. First up, let's talk about the M103. This is probably one of the worst tier 9 heavy tanks inside the game. And yeah, we have to scroll all the way down to the bottom. And the only vehicle that's worse is actually the M6Y, which is one of the newest heavy tanks in the game. Yeah, Wargaming looks like you really failed with those ones. And so it's understandable that this tank is getting some love. So what exactly are Wargaming doing to it? Well, firstly, they're increasing the armor of the commander's cupola up to 190 to 200 millimeters of effective armor. It currently stands at about 110, so that is a substantial buff. Although I question what really is going to struggle to get through 190 to 200 millimeters of effective armor. The only kind of tanks that will be tier 7 vehicles that don't have access to good gold rounds, and also tier 8 tanks that aren't willing to fire gold rounds inside the game. Tier 9s and tier 10s all have more penetration than that, so they're not going to have to worry about that. So apart from maybe some high explosive damage reduction to the top of the M103 hitting that weak point, this is really only going to help the M103 inside a nice matchup, and it's still going to have to watch out. But again, when you use your gun depression, the M103, it's completely covered. So I never really thought of the weak point as being that significant on this tank. Wargaming are also buffing the dispersion when you're moving on this vehicle from 0.2 on the stock tracks to 0.18 and 0.18 to 0.16 on the upgraded tracks. That will help the vehicle out a little bit. Still, definitely not within the area of where I would very happily give up vertical stabilizers on that tank. Wargaming are, however, nerfing the traverse speed of the vehicle on the upgraded tracks from 32 degrees a second down to 26, but they are massively buffing the dispersion when you turn the turret of the upgraded turret from 0.1 to 0.06. That is definitely within the region where I'd want to give up vertical stabilizers on this tank. Maybe you could just get yourself smooth ride on your driver to help that relatively poor dispersion when you're moving, and then invest in maybe coated optics or vertical stabilizers or vents, in addition to maybe a gun rammer and a durability device on this tank. Also, Wargaming are nerfing the turret traverse speed, but just by 1 degree. Doesn't really matter too much. They're buffing the ammunition capacity of the tank up to 45, so you should be able to take a good old selection of high explosive anti-tank rounds on this vehicle, which are definitely one of the highlights at 340 millimeters of pen. And all in all, the M103, including a durability buff up to a 1,950 hit points, is looking definitely that it's going to be in a good position. They're not buffing the damage per minute of this vehicle because it's already great at 2,400. And I feel like with these buffs to the durability of the vehicle, as well as also to the dispersion when you're moving, and this thing could be a little bit of a, not a terror on a ridgeline. And I like the way that Wargaming are approaching this. They're not just flat out making the vehicle crazy, but they're giving it a little bit of love to see what happens. And of course, remember, Characteristics are not final, everything is subject to change, so maybe they're going to buff it a little bit more before release. Okay, now let's talk about one of the classics, the T-32. This is a Tier 8 American heavy tank, and let's take a look to see what kind of a position the vehicle has been in, at least with regards to win ratio. Might as well just click the regular tanks, because all the premium ones are always on top. So the T-32 is actually almost right in the middle of all of the tech tree tanks. It kind of surprises me. I actually kind of enjoy playing this thing. It's got probably one of the best turrets tier for tier in the game. But as you can see, it does do quite poor damage, but still has a half decent win ratio, and that's just because of how resilient that turret is, and because it's able to spot out quite efficiently on a ridgeline. So what are Wargaming planning to do to the T-32? Well, firstly, they're buffing the dispersion quite substantially. On the upgraded tracks, it's 0.21 to 0.16. That's really nice. Again, right on the cusp of where maybe dropping the vert stabs and thinking about using a turbo on this otherwise slow tank, or maybe in further enhancing the vehicle's great view range up with coated optics. They're also buffing the hull traverse speed, as opposed to the M103, where they were nerfing it a little bit, to 29 degrees. But oh dear, look, they're actually nerfing the view range of this tank down to 390. Well, that kind of makes sense, because the M103 has 390 meters view range, and I guess when you jump up to tier 10 on the American heavies, that it's actually got 400. So the M103 was kind of this middle child that just didn't quite get as much view range as the T-32 or the T-110E5, but that is definitely going to hurt this vehicle. Nevertheless, because of the fact that there are field mods inside the game, and I believe that the T-32 still has access to the newly buffed view range up by 3%. As long as you actually have the field mods, you're probably still not going to have to use coated optics on this tank, but when you're grinding through it, I'd probably have a coated optics build now, just for those kind of maps like Prokhorovka or Malinovka, where you really want to try and enhance the view range of the vehicle, because that's where this tank is special. It's special to have a really nice turret and to be on a ridge line and to be able to spot for the kind of like the midline. Wargaming are also substantially buffing the 105mm caliber gun on this tank. The penetration's going from 208 up to 218. I swear that back in the day it used to be about 198 or 193. Wargaming just seemed to keep adding on the extra pen. Shows you where the game is going. And the premium pen's going from 245 up to 252. That's really nice changes to this vehicle. It was definitely one of the only tech tree tanks, I'd say, at tier 8 that truly struggled with its penetration for a vehicle that doesn't have an autoloader or wants to try and flank. In addition to this, they're also buffing the reload time of the tank from 9.4 seconds up to 9 seconds. So this means that the DPM of the vehicle is going to go from 2042, which is not half bad, all the way up to 2133. That's pretty nice DPM for a tier 8 heavy tank. In fact, let's take a quick look to see how it compares to all of the other vehicles with regards to DPM at tier 8 when they do this. Wow, it's actually going to go right up towards the KV4, whereas previously it was between the Tiger 2. So this is definitely a tank that I would want to get a gun rammer and vents on, and that will make this thing quite dangerous, a lot like an Oh-Ho at being able to pick apart its opponents fairly quickly. And also, in addition, they're buffing the accuracy from 0.38, or should I say from 0.4 to 0.38. All in all, really nice buffs to the T-32. And it's quite interesting to me. I'd say that this vehicle was actually performing better than the M103, so I don't really understand why Wargaming are buffing this one so much more than the M103. But hey, I'm not going to complain. You get to play a T-32 and actually be competitive. So Wargaming are also addressing vehicles like the M6, and this is a tremendous buff to the tier 6 American Heavy. Should we take a look to see how the vehicle has been performing? Yeah, the second worst, only behind the KV-1S, although I'd say the KV-1S is probably in that position purely because it used to be crazy OP back in the day, and then Wargaming nerfed it so darn much. So the M6, reverse speed up to 14 kilometers an hour, very nice. Hit points up by 100 at tier 6, that's beautiful. They're also buffing the turret armor of the M6D2 turret up to 190 to 200 millimeters of effective. Does that mean that this thing is going to be an absolute beast with regards to its turret armor? Wow, are you serious? Is that the mantlet they're buffing? Yes, it is. So up to 200 millimeters of turret armor? Wow, boys and girls. Obviously, the hull armor is still going to be absolutely tragic on the M6 unless they're buffing it as well. Are they planning on buffing the hull armor? No. That is going to make this thing really good. Not many tier 4 to tier 7 tanks will reliably be able to get through that mantlet. That is a huge buff to the M6, and it's really going to become a little bit of a ridgeline warrior. Honestly, having just played through this vehicle recently, I can tell you it's not a bad tank. And for Wargaming to be doing that to the vehicle, this looks huge. They're also buffing the view range from 350 up to 360. This means that easily with binoculars you're going to be able to spot your opponents. Or alternatively, if you've got a really good crew and coated optics, you're probably not even going to need the binoculars on this vehicle. They're also buffing the aim time of what is one of the best guns, in my opinion, tier for tier in the game. This 90mm behemoth that you can get on this vehicle. And they're also buffing the reload speed from 7.6 up to 7. So that means that we are going from a DPM of 1,894 all the way up to a DPM of 2,057. That seems crazy for me. Wow, Wargaming, this is pretty... I think that this one is going to be one of the hot tanks, boys and girls. I think this is going to be one of the hot tanks. That is going to mean that the M6 is going to have a better DPM than everything apart from the KV-1S. Although, as we can see, that isn't really helping the KV-1S very much, at least with regards to its win ratio. I think that this is probably going to be one of the most terrifying tier 6 tanks that you could ever play with or specifically against. Huge buffs to a vehicle that I already thought was okay. Wargaming are also buffing the T1 heavy that leads to the M6. Hit points up by 50, reverse speed better, mantlet arm up to 175. Again, beautiful. There are even tier 7 tanks that won't be able to get through that very reliably. View range buff, aiming speed buff, and they're also buffing the accuracy, the dispersion when you're turning the turret from 0.16 up to 0.12. Massive buffs to the T1 heavy that should help it in its quest to be able to be the daddy of tier 5 heavy tanks. Wow, all in all, huge buffs so far. Wargaming are also buffing the T6 medium tank that leads on towards the T1 heavy by increasing the vehicle's durability and also the forward speed and the reverse speed of the T6 medium tank. This kind of surprises me because I always thought that the T6 medium tank was actually pretty okay at tier 4, especially for all of the SEAL clubbers out there who actually want to end up using the derp gun on this tank. And trust me, a derp gun still works at tier 4, especially if you're able to get yourself some intuition on this tank, switching between the heat rounds and the derp rounds on this vehicle. I'd say this is probably one of the better tier 4 medium tanks still. With these buffs, I think unnecessary buffs in my opinion on this vehicle, I think the tank is going to become a little bit OP for a SEAL clubber, but I understand that not everybody who plays this tank is a SEAL clubber, and for them, when they're kind of using one of the 75mm caliber guns, I can understand why Wargaming want to try and ease people into this tech tree. They're also buffing the M3 Stuart, hit points up, both with the stock and the upgraded turret, aiming time improved, and the dispersion during the turret traverses getting buffed a little bit as well. Again, not really a tank that I think about all that much, but I think that's one of the beautiful things that Wargaming are doing. They're not just thinking about the high tier players, they're also thinking about the mid and lower tier players. I would imagine, maybe I need to get my tinfoil hat off for this, that considering that Wargaming has left now the CIS region completely, that maybe they're actually thinking about the kinds of vehicles that Americans play. And it is very much the case that when people start off in World of Tanks, they always end up playing their nation's vehicles first, at least about 60 to even in some regions 80% of the time. And so maybe these buffs are coming in now because Wargaming realize that they are going to have to expand into the American market as well as the European market where they're very firmly established as much as possible if they want to continue to make good money. But I'd say for us as the players, this is a win-win-win. Vehicles which you'd only play, for me personally, during a tech tree showcase are now going to actually become playable. However, ladies and gents, boys and girls, it's not all good news for American tanks today, and that is because Wargaming are actually nerfing one of the original best tanks tier for tier in the game, and also in artillery, which I'm going to get onto into a second. So the T-29 is going to be on the chopping board. Wargaming are making some quite substantial nerfs to this vehicle. Its view range is going down from 380, which was amazing at tier 7, down to 370, and the aiming time on the 105mm gun is increasing from 2.3 seconds to 2.7 seconds, and the reload time of the 105mm gun is changing from 11.4 to 13.2. That is actually quite painful because this vehicle didn't have the best DPM to begin with, and if these changes do come to fruition, this vehicle is going to have awful DPM. Do you know one thing that's pretty weird about this is that even though Wargaming are nerfing this 105mm caliber gun, in addition to also a little bit of hull traverse speed, when I played the T-29, as long as I was spamming gold, I could just use the 90mm caliber gun. I'd have better DPM, and as long as I fired gold, I still had 243mm of penetration, which is very similar to the 245 on the 105mm. So Wargaming, I'd hate to break it to you, but all these nerfs are really going to do is just punish people, usually the free-to-play players who play with the 105mm gun on the T-29. And Wargaming, if you're really serious about stopping the T-29 from being a seal clubber, then I would recommend also addressing the 90mm caliber gun on this tank, because if you don't, that 90mm caliber gun is going to definitely become the best one on the tank. It's arguably, if you've got deep pockets, already the best gun on the tank, but maybe Wargaming want to keep this hush-hush, you know, don't hurt like our little gold spamming seal clubbers. No, we're just going to nerf the casual players who are playing the T-29. We'll see. Was this nerf necessary? You know what? I think it was. Look at the thing's win ratio, 51.36. If we compare it to all of the heavy tanks, it's better than some of the premium ones. It's even better than the VZ44-1. And this is a tank that has been in the game since the very beginning. I think that the T-29 was probably so good that it prevented a lot of people from continuing up the tech tree. And even with the T-32 nerfs, that still definitely probably would maybe be the case. You know, I'm definitely scraping the battle where I use like 3 different maybe words in that. I just feel that it shows that Wargaming kind of are aware of the tech tree, and they're aware of the win ratios, and they're aware of vehicles that are frankly just too good down the line and vehicles that are not quite good enough. And I think their only real options are either to leave the T-29 the way that it is, or to just nerf it a little bit. And it's not like they're butchering the tank. Maybe if you're using the 105mm, you're definitely not going to be doing as well, but considering that it's already got the 3rd best win ratio of any heavy tank, nearly better than the King Tiger, I don't think that these nerfs are going to completely destroy the T-29, but I think that they are a step towards the vehicle being a little bit more balanced. But Wargaming, you've got to do something about the 90mm on this vehicle, otherwise these nerfs, they won't really matter all that much. Okay, so ladies and gents, boys and girls, this one is going to be controversial for all of the artillery players out there. Wargaming are nerfing the M44. Now, for me personally, I'm actually incredibly happy that they are nerfing the M44. It's become a little bit of a problem. Look, it's played 3 times more than any of the other self-propelled guns. In fact, I'd say that it's probably one of the most played vehicles at Tier 6. It's actually more played than any other Tier 6 vehicle that is not a premium tank, and nearly played as much as the T-34-85M. I think this is just a popularity problem with the M44, because as we can see, its win ratio is not really that outrageous compared to the other vehicles. In fact, the FV304 and the AMX-13F F3 have better win ratios. So maybe what Wargaming are doing are simply trying to cut down on this tank's numbers, because I'm not sure if any of you have played Tier 6, but it almost isn't even worth playing if there are 3 of these on the enemy team. They just absolutely pound you again and again and again, and there's not really too much that you can do about it. So, what are they doing to the M44? They're nerfing the accuracy, both of the howitzers on this vehicle, which will massively reduce its damage. They're also making the aim time substantially worse, and they're increasing the reload by 6 seconds on the top gun. This will be a huge nerf to the M44. It's not really the best of the self-propelled guns at tier 6, but I guess just its popularity with a lot of players who just want to sit there and just maybe make some credits has led to the vehicle's demise. And while I'm sure that there will be hardcore M44 players out there who will be a little bit disappointed that this is just yet another nerf to a vehicle that maybe they only play, as somebody who has just torn their hair out at the prospect of playing around about tier 5 and tier 6. Tier 5 and tier 6 self-propelled guns are just doing too much damage. It is not right to get hit for 250 damage when you've only got 600 hit points on your tank. I don't get hit for that much when I'm playing my tier 9 and tier 10 tanks. There's a problem with how much armor low tier vehicles have compared to the penetration of the self-propelled guns, and Wargaming have kind of put themselves in this awkward position where the mid-tier self-propelled guns are doing as much as the top-tier self-propelled guns, but of course the mid-tier tanks don't have as much hit points as the top-tier tanks. So I am quite happy with the nerfs to a vehicle which is just too popular, because artillery is not meant to be played this much. It's meant to be 1 or 2 of the tanks of a team at most, and when there are 3 vehicles in every single game that you're playing, that is darn toxic. And while I'm happy that Wargaming are addressing this while they're doing the American nerfs, all that I really see this doing is just pushing players onto vehicles like the AMX-13 F3, or alternatively like the FV304, which again is just as broken, if not more broken, than the M44. But you know what? Wargaming can't do everything all at the same time, and I like the way that they're giving a nod to the M44 at the same time as addressing the other American heavies. So, ladies and gents, boys and girls, those were all of the buffs and the nerfs to American vehicles. All in all, I'd say that it's put the American heavy tank line in a real good position, and there is definitely some exciting tanks like the M6 that you could be able to make your way up, and the T32 as well. Looks like it's going to be better than ever. Now, would I want to play the T32 compared to the Renegade? No. But not everybody does have a Renegade, right? And a lot of people are just wanting to make their way up the tech tree. And I think for those kind of players, Wargaming are doing them proud. And all in all, Wargaming, I'd like to give you a massive thumbs up for these changes. I don't think that too many of them are outrageous, and I don't think that too many of them are absolutely awful either. I think you've done a good job all in all, Wargaming, and I'd like to give you a thumbs up that you're even considering and addressing these vehicles. These aren't the ones that make Wargaming money, but they are the ones that help people up the tech tree, and especially their American audience, which, whether Americans like it or not, they're going to be the ones that bring Wargaming the most money, are going to be playing these tanks more often. And so maybe I'm a little bit cynical, but this definitely does look like a sign that Wargaming are thinking about the Western market more now that they have effectively fully severed any ties that they have to Belarus and to Russia. And if this is a sign of anything that's to come at a future date, or an overall new Wargaming policy, I honestly think this is a win-win for the player base, and especially a win-win for all of the free-to-play players out there. Anyway, ladies and gents, boys and girls, that was it. Really hope you enjoyed this breakdown. If you did, make sure you give the video a thumbs up. If you hated it, however, give it a thumbs down. And let me know in the comments what you think about all of these buffs and nerfs. Do you think that it's fair that the T29 is getting nerfed? Are you absolutely jumping for joy at the fact that the M44 is getting nerfed as well? And what do you think about all of the buffs to all of the other vehicle? And especially, do you think the M103 has received enough love? And as always, thank you so much for watching. You've been epic, and hopefully I'll see you soon.